Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 23 of Great Guitar Build Off 2023. And in this episode, we're going to address the mystery of what's going into that control cavity. Okay, so in the last couple of episodes, we've been working on either the control cavity or the cover that's going to go over it. Now that could do with possibly a little bit more fettling, but on the whole, I'm very pleased with it. The fit is quite good and the grain kind of matches a little bit. So I think once there's some finish on that, it won't look out of place. However, the important question is, what's going to go inside here? Because obviously this is bigger than we need for one volume and one tone, which might be the normal with a one pickup guitar. Now, when I said I was going to put this oversized cavity in, there was all sorts of speculation in the comments, but the one thing that lots of people were saying, and something that hadn't crossed my mind for a millisecond, was a kill switch. I've never ever thought about putting a kill switch in a guitar, but as soon as people said it, I thought, do you know what? On this guitar, that's a bloody good call. So, due to popular demand, if there's space, we will be having a kill switch. But the one thing I do want to put in here is one of these, or rather a clone of one of these. And what this is an Alembic Strato Blaster, and it's basically a clean boost. And I'm thinking with this guitar, if you're kind of playing a dirty rhythm part, you could kick in the boost and kind of go into your lead work without having to do any tap dancing on various pedals and stuff. There is an argument to say that you could just turn the volume up and that would have the same effect, but if you're on 10, where do you go from there? This will be at least one more louder. In fact, if my memory serves me well, this boost will give you about 25 decibels of louder. So it really is worthwhile having. I'm not aware that you can buy this particular thing as an onboard boost. You can buy kits for them. I've built one of them, but it is in fact a very basic circuit. So I'm going to actually make this from scratch using components that I've probably got kicking about. I'm hopefully not going to have to buy any bits. Let's see what we can find. Well, I've had a good hunt through my collection of components and I do actually have everything I need. And basically I've got a bunch of resistors, there's not that many, a couple of capacitors and one J201 JFET transistor, which is what does the actual work in this circuit. And the only bit I didn't actually have kicking around in stock, so I've had to kind of pull it off an old circuit that wasn't in use, is the potentiometer to control this. It's a rather specific potentiometer. It's a 50K linear, which I can't find one in a push-pull pot. So my idea was that this pot would both turn on and off the circuit and control the level from it. I'm not going to be able to do that, so it's a bit counterintuitive. I'm going to have to use the tone pot to switch the circuit in and out and then just use this for level. We are where we are, we can't help that really. Which only really leaves me the question of what am I going to build this on? You can buy a PCB for these. I'm not going to do that though, because A, I'd have to order one and it'd take a while to get here, and B, there's another cheaper solution. It's not quite as elegant, but it does work. And it's using this stuff, which is perf board. And basically you cut off a section of this big enough to house your circuit. You need to make some cuts in it in specific places to break the circuit, and then you insert your components in the right places, solder it all in place, few wires, Bob's your uncle. I will go through this in much greater detail as we build this board, but the first thing we need to do is find out exactly how big our piece of perf board needs to be. Ideally quite small so it will fit in the cavity. We can get that cut down to size, get it cleaned up and start building this thing up. And to get started in preparation for this, I've got a few things in hand. I've got my tag board layout, which I'll be following to put this together. I've got a schematic just in case I kind of come across any problems that I need a bit more information. And then I've got this piece of board that we can cut down to use in the actual circuit. And the first thing we need to do is establish how big we need this. And if we look on here, it's actually 5 of these rows deep by 7 holes wide. But I'm going to make mine slightly bigger and add 2 holes each side. So my board needs to be 5 by 11. So I'll just measure that out, mark it up. So I think I'll just whip this over to the bandsaw and quickly get that cut down to size. So there's our tiny little bit of board cut. I've cleaned all those edges off nicely so it's just nice to handle, no sharpness or anything. And the next thing we need to do, if we look at our layout, is it says make cuts all the way down column 4. Now obviously I've added a bit more onto this board, so that will make it column 6, which is, you can just see there's that mark there. And all I'm going to do to make the cuts, you might be able to see there's a copper surface on the back of this board, and it's kind of divided up into rows with holes perforated through it, thus perf board. And the copper is obviously there to make contact between your components. However, sometimes you need not to have a contact, unless your circuit just won't work. And in this case, it's laid out quite neatly that all of the cuts are just on that line down there. And all I do is I've got an old drill bit, a bit of masking tape around it just to make it easier to hold. And I'm just going to gently just turn that drill bit by hand and cut away that copper. And you need to do a good job of this, because if you leave a connection, it's simply not going to work. And you can do a pretty good visual check on there, but just to make sure, I always go in with the meter and check. And see, I'm checking that row and I'm getting a reading, but if I shift up to the row I've just worked on, I'm getting nothing. So I'll just work my way down all of these little cuts now, and that will be our board prepped up. And then finally, in the prep of this board, I'm just going to take, it's a 2.5mm drill bit, and one of these holes in the middle of the end. I'm just going to drill those through so we can put a screw through to actually hold this in position in the guitar. Now I've made a lot of boards with this stuff, quite a lot of pedals. I've made reverb pedals, delay pedals, all sorts of stuff, over the years, and they're actually quite resilient. They do last a long time, but I do find the thing that kills them is if they're just flopping around inside a case. So if you can find somewhere fastening them in position, they do last a hell of a lot longer. Okay, so that is pretty much the board prepared. We now need to turn it over and start getting some components fitted. Okay, so we can start to get some components into this little board now, and I'm going to start off by putting the transistor in first. Doesn't really matter what order you put stuff in, but I just want to get this in and out of the way. The only thing you have to watch with these transistors is that you put them in the right way, but that is shown on the drawing, and it's actually the shape of them that determines which is the right way around. So it's actually not that easy to get it wrong. So what I'll do is I'll bring you in a lot closer to this so you can see what I'm doing, and we can get soldering. Now this is going to be kind of quite a lot more intricate than the usual soldering jobs that I do, so I'm going to do things a little bit differently than normal, starting with using a little bit of this flux just to make sure everything flows nicely. I'm going to be using a tiny little tip on my soldering iron. Okay, so that little soldering iron doesn't seem to be working very well, which is less than ideal, but the big one is getting me where I need to get, so it's not too much of a problem. It's a little bit messier than I'd want it to be, but it seems to have kind of got everything where I need it, so we'll just try and keep everything as neat as possible. So with that added, we can start adding some resistors, starting with the one right down the bottom, which is a 68K. Okay, so that's the first one in place. I'll just start working my way through the rest of the resistors, and I'll get back to you once we've got them all in place. Okay, so next up we need to put the two capacitors in. Now these need to go in the right way because they're polarized, and you might just be able to see on there, there's a little plus sign on the body of the cap, but also the positive leg is longer than the negative one. And I know that the positive needs to come from this pin of the transistor through this little bridge and into the capacitor. So that goes in there, that way round. Like that. And the other one connects to the potentiometer, which comes into this track here. So the positive needs to be again that way round, like that. So I'll solder those two in, and then we're just looking at positioning all of the wires that need to come in and out of here and soldering on the pot. And as you can see, you get quite a lot of solder on the back of these things, but it doesn't really make any difference. They will work absolutely fine. It's just I'm trying to work with basically the wrong tip on my soldering iron, which is making life a little bit more difficult, but there you go. Okay, so that's everything wired up. All the wires are on, so we've got the battery snap there, we've got an input, an output, and an additional ground, and the potentiometer wired on. I haven't done one of these in ages, and I think that showed, and I think my soldering is not the neatest in the world, but it will be effective, so we won't worry too much about that. So next up, we need to get it into my little test rig and see if it actually works. Okay, so I've got this wired into my little temporary test box. It just allows me to wire things in. Then I've got an input and output jack and a switch on the side, which means I can run the effect without kind of having to put it into a proper enclosure or wire it properly into anything. So we'll just close this up and see if it actually does what it should do. That's the control pot for the effect. So hopefully, if I turn that down, we'll be able to see if it works properly. Okay, so we're all set up with this in the little box now, and I've bought in a guitar that's equipped with humbuckers because that is what I'm going to be using on this guitar when it's finished. And I've just got it plugged into my cheap crappy amp that I keep down the shed. This is straight into the amp, clean, with this bypassed. So now I've got the boost set on, it's probably about 12 o'clock there. And we'll just kick that in. There's a little bit of noise, but I think that might be something to do with this box, but so as you can see, that is a little bit louder. So we'll just crank this now to maximum volume. That is significantly louder, and you can hear it's starting to, apologies for the out-of-tune guitar, but that is starting to drive that amp quite hard. The amp is set at the moment to clean, so I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to change the setting and put a bit of gain on. So we've got a bit of gain there, but it's not massively overdriven. We'll bang this in full blast and see what happens. I'm going to call that a success. There is a little bit of noise, I think that's the box, but also we were running that flat out, so that could potentially have something to do with it as well. But on the whole, very happy with that. I think it's worked quite nicely. So that's another part of the jigsaw sorted out. My next step in terms of the wiring is going to be getting hold of a kill switch and also getting the push-pull pots and everything sorted out, so I can start to at least have an idea of how that wiring's going to go together. But that's going to take a little bit of time, so I think the next episode we're going to be getting those templates off the 3D printer, and we're going to be having a go at getting that tremolo system routed and installed. That's going to be a little bit of a nerve-shattering experience for me because I've never done one before, but I'm sure if I watch enough videos between now and installing that thing, I should be okay. But that's all going to be for a future episode. I'm going to leave this one here, so as always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.